Her bright eyes flashed merrily as she took a comprehensive survey of our amused faces. "Think I'm irreverent, do you?" she went on. "But you know, Pa's not a stage parent, all dressed out in lovely white hair and benedictions. He's just an accommodating railway track, and he wouldn't like to be reverenced. Do sit down, won't you?" Then, turning her pretty head coquettishly towards her host, "Make them sit down, Lord Elton. I hate to see men standing. The superior sex, you know. Besides, you're so tall," she added, glancing with unconcealed admiration at Lucio's handsome face and figure. "It's like that is like peering up an apple tree at the moon to look at you." Lucio laughed heartily and seated himself near her. I followed his example. The old Earl still kept his position, legs astraddle on the hearthrug, and beamed benevolence upon us all. Certainly, Diana Chesney was a captivating creature, one of those surface-clever American women who distinctly divert men's minds without the least rousing their passions. "So you're the famous Mr. Tempest," she said, surveying me critically. "Why, it's simply splendid for you, isn't it? I always say it's no use having a heap of money unless you're young. If you're old, you only want it to fill your doctor's pockets while he tries to mend your poor tuckered-out constitution. I once knew an old lady who was left a legacy of £100,000 when she was 95. Poor old dear, she cried over it. She had just sense enough to understand what's a good time she couldn't have. She lived in a bed, and her only luxury was a halfpenny bun dipped in her milk for her tea. It was all she cared for." £100,000 would go a long way in buns," I said, smiling. "Wouldn't it just?" And the fair Diana laughed. "But I guess you'll want something a little more substantial for your cash, Mr. Tempest. A fortune in the prime of life is worth having. I suppose you're one of the richest men about just now, aren't you?" She put the question in a perfectly naive, frank manner, and it seemed to be unconscious of any undue inquisitiveness in it. "I may be one of the richest," I replied, and as I spoke the thought flashed suddenly across me how recently I had been one of the poorest. "But my friend here, the prince, is far richer than I." "Is that so?" And she stared straight at Lucio, who met her gaze with an indulgent, half-satirical smile. "Well now, I guess Pa's no better than a sort of pauper after all. Why, you must have half the world at your feet." "Pretty much so," replied Lucio composedly. "But then, my dear Miss Chesney, the world is so very easily brought to one's feet. Surely you know that." And he emphasized the words by an expressive look of his fine eyes. "I guess you mean compliments," she replied unconcernedly. "I don't like them as a rule, but I'll forgive you this once." "Do," said Lucio, with one of his dazzling smiles that caused her to stop a moment in her voluble chatter and observe him with a mingled fascination and wonderment. "And you too are young, like Mr. Tempest," she resumed pleasantly. "Pardon me," interrupted Lucio. "I'm many years older." "Really?" exclaimed Lord Elton at this juncture. "You don't look it. Does he, Charlotte?" Miss Fitzroy, thus appealed to, raised her elegant tortoise-shell framed glasses to her eyes and peered critically at us both. "I should imagine the prince to be slightly the senior of Mr. Tempest," she remarked in precise, high-bred accents, "but only very slightly." "Anyhow," resumed Miss Chesney, "you're young enough to enjoy your wealth, aren't you?" "Young enough or old enough, just as you please," said Lucio with a careless shrug. "But as it happens, I do not enjoy it." Miss Chesney's whole aspect now expressed the most lively astonishment. "What does money do for you?" went on Lucio, his eyes dilated with that strange and wistful expression which had often excited my curiosity. "The world is at your feet, perhaps. Yes, but what a world! What a trumpery clod of kickable matter! Wealth acts merely as a kind of mirror to show you how human nature at its worst. Men skulk and fawn about you, and lie 20 times in as many hours in the hopes of propitiating you and serve their own interests. Princes of the blood willingly degrade themselves in their position to borrow cash of you. Your intrinsic merit, if you have any, is thought nothing of. Your full pockets are your credentials with kings, prime ministers, and councillors. You may talk like a fool, laugh like a hyena, and look like a baboon, but if the chink of your gold be only sufficiently loud, you may soon find yourself dining with a queen, if such be your ambition. If, on the contrary, you happen to be truly great, brave, patient, and enduring, with a spark in you of that genius which strengthens life and makes it better worth living, if you have thoughts which take shape in work that shall endure when kingdoms are swept away like dust before the wind, and if, with all this, you are yet poor in current coin, why then you shall be spurned by all the crowned dummies of the world. You shall be snubbed by the affluent starch makers and the crocuses who live on a patent pill. The tradesmen from whom you buy your bedsteads and kitchenware can look down upon you with lordly scorn, for does not he, by virtue of his wealth alone, drive a four in hand, and chat on easy and almost patronizing terms with the Prince of Wales? The wealthy Desnians of Snobland delight in ignoring nature's elect noblemen. But supposing, said Miss Chesney quickly, you happen to be nature's nobleman yourself, and have the advantage of wealth beside, surely you must fairly allow that to be rather a good thing, mustn't you? Lucio laughed a little. I will retort upon your own words, fair lady, and say, I guess you mean compliments. What I venture to imply, however, is that even when wealth does fall to the lot of one of these nature's noblemen, it is not because of his innate nobility that he wins social distinction. It is simply because he is rich. That is what vexes me. I, for example, have endless friends who are not my friends so much as the friends of my income. They do not trouble to inquire as to my antecedents. What I am or where I came from is no importance. Neither are they concerned in how I live or what I do. Whether I am sick or well, happy or unhappy, is equally with them a matter of indifference. If they knew more about me, it would perhaps be better in the long run. But they do not want to know. Their aims are simple and unconcealed. They wish to make as much out of me, and secure as much advantage to themselves by their acquaintance with me as possible. And I give them their full way. They get what they want, and more. His musical voice lingered with a curiously melancholy impressiveness on the last word, and this time, not only Miss Chesney, but we all looked at him as though drawn by some irresistible magnetic spell, and for a moment there was silence. Very few people have any real friends, said Lord Elton presently, and in that respect I suppose we're none of us worse off than Socrates, who used to keep 2 chairs only in his house, one for myself and another for a friend, when I find him. But you are a universal favourite, Lucio, a most popular fellow, and I think you're rather hard on your set. People must look after themselves, you know, eh? Lucio bowed his head gravely. They must indeed, he replied, especially as the latest news of science is that God has given up the business. Miss Fitzroy looked displeased, but the Earl laughed uproariously. At that moment a step was heard outside, approaching the doorway of the drawing-room, and Miss Chesney's quick ears caught the sound. She shook herself out of her reclining attitude instantly and sat erect. "It's Sybil," she said, with half-laughing, half-apologetic flash of her brown eyes at us. "I can never loll before Sybil." My heart beat fast as the woman whom poets might have called the goddess of their dreams, but whom I now disposed to consider as an object of beauty lawfully open to my purchase, entered, clad in simple white, unrelieved by any ornaments save a golden waist-belt of antique workmanship, and a knot of violets nestled among the lace at her bosom. She looked far lovelier than when I had first seen her at the theatre. There was a deeper light in her eyes, and a more roseate flush on her cheeks, while her smile as she greeted us was positively dazzling. Something in her presence, her movements, her manner, set such a tide of passion through me that for a moment my brain whirled in a dizzy maze, and despite the cold calculations I had made in my own mind as to the certainty I had of winning her for my wife, there was a wondrous charm of delicate dignity and unapproachableness about her that caused me for the moment to feel ashamed, and inclined to doubt even the power of wealth to move this exquisite lily of maidenhood from her sequestered peace. Ah, what fools men are! How little do we dream of the canker at the heart of these women lilies that look so pure and full of grace.